Hi friends, it's Lisa. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're creating this really simple but really impactful card. And we're going to use the Sketched Flowers stamp set, but we're only using that little leaf stamp and the rose stamp. This card would be a lot easier if you used a smaller stamping block. But this is the last card for my Capsule Crafting collection, which I have found immensely hard to say. I apologize if it takes me a second to say it. Anyway, and so all I have is this real large block, and what can you do? I'm stamping these stamps down with Versa Fine Black Onyx ink, and I'm just stamping anywhere there's a space. I make sure to rotate the stamp off the edges, anywhere that there is a big enough space for a rose to fit without touching another rose, because I definitely wanted to keep some white space on this. You can always mask and add roses below other roses, that kind of stuff, but on this card I specifically really wanted some white space. I don't know why, but this month I've just been real drawn to pinks and reds. I don't know if you've seen that, but I have a lot of pinks and reds in my cards. Maybe it's Valentine's Day is still in my heart. Anyway, so I knew I wanted to do black, white, and red. Now, what I'm doing is I took that same stamp, stamped it on some masking paper, and this is the Eclipse masking paper. I just had this little square left over from my last project, so I stamped it in the middle, and then I'm cutting out, and I'm doing it on that black line. Since these black lines are a little bit bigger, you can do that. So I cut in the middle of those black lines. Then I'm sticking that down to some different roses that have large white spaces beside them, and I'm going to stamp with this leaf stamp into those open areas. But I'm still not touching other roses. So these lines will touch the rose that they're attached to, but no other roses. So if I do mess up and don't stamp a full leaf, I just bring in my marker, my Sharpie pen, and fill in the lines. I did that once or twice and you can't even tell on the end card. So I did only ink up the top half of this stamp because the stamp is quite a bit larger, and I obviously don't want to cut into a stamped image. So there we go. And I did use my scissors to help me pull off the little masking paper because sometimes it gets hard. I do heat dry the ink at this point. I dried it after I finished all the flowers as well, so that I wouldn't pull up any of that ink when I added the mask down. And the same reason I'm doing that now, as well as I didn't want to smudge any of the black ink around. So I take my time and put the outer mask, which is why I took so careful cutting of that, and I put it around the edge. No problem at all doing that. It just takes a second, and wham bam, you're done. The one thing I do want to note, and it's a big mistake I make on this first one, is when I come back in with that lighter color, I go over the edge of the masking paper and, of course, make a line onto my actual card. But I hide that behind the sentiment later. So you can fix those kind of mistakes, just you have to be careful about it. One thing I wanted to note, that when I made that mask, you can do one of two things. you can create 2 of those masks, or you can add some micro glaze, Tim Holtz micro glaze over the top, buff it off, wait 5 minutes, and then cut it out, and you won't have the issue I have in a minute, where some of the ink starts to bleed through. But next we'll move on, and I'm sped this way up. On some of the flowers, I do a really light color. Some of them, like the first 2 we saw, I do more intense color. That's one of the great things about these blending brushes, is you can kind of control the amount. Even though I'm using the exact same inks, I'm only using 2. This is a real simple card. I loved that about this, and it looks so great. Here you can see that's where I stopped because my mask was starting to allow ink to seep through. I will fix that on the final card, and you'll see in just a minute. I'm not going to show you cutting out the other mask and masking off and filling in those flowers because it was literally the same. I got a little frustrated at that point, which is why I colored the leaves in, and I just did that with kind of a teal, green, blue color from my Caran d'Ache markers, or colored pencils. Next, I am embossing the sentiment. I stamped that down with embossing ink pad, stamped the stamp down onto this black cardstock. I'm going to pour over some white embossing powder. This is the fine embossing powder from Ranger. And since I didn't use an embossing buddy bag on the paper, some of the little embossing powder does stick to the paper where you don't want it. So I'm just taking a dry brush and brushing that off. Then I heat embossed it real quick with such a small stamp, and with a really powerful heat gun, it embosses really quickly. Then I decided to add a fishtail, so in the middle of that card I just cut a line and then cut from the corners to the top of that line that you saw right there. But I felt like it needed a little bit more embellishment, so I'm doing that same technique I did a couple cards ago that I actually got a couple comments about. People were like, oh my gosh, this is such a great idea. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It just came to me. And I thought I could use that same idea on this card, where I'm just using a piece of paper to add some lines here at the end. And you'll see on the final card that it does add a little bit of zhuzh to the card. So that was a lot of fun. It's an easy way to kind of step up the end of your little sentiment. Here I'm taking a dry brush and just a dab of gesso. So this isn't even like acrylic paint. Gesso is basically acrylic paint, but it's usually more opaque and thicker. So I'm taking that straight to the paper. Just a little bit. I covered it, and then I'm going to heat dry that tiny little bit and then cover it again, because the pink reds can be hard to cover. But once with 2 coats, it was fine. You don't notice it or see it. So that was super simple. Covered and fixed it. I could have done that same thing with the line that I created at the very beginning, but I ended up just putting the sentiment over there, and it looked fine. Even easier. So I am adding some liquid glue. I was having to squeeze real hard because my niece had been using it a day or 2 before, and it got a little dry in the nib, but I fixed that. And just glued that down. I do like using the liquid adhesive to add the back of the card, because I can smush it around. Since this is such a simple card, I did not want to misalign that sentiment because it would look real funky. So I used my Make Art Station to make sure I had that lined up correctly. Next, I am cutting off the edge with my trimmer because it's pretty wide and I thought that would be the best way to do it. And that is the end of the card. It's so simple. It's really real easy, and you only need 3 stamps. Here we are at the end of this video, end of February, end of the Capsule Crafting Challenge. I have one more video, a vlog, to kind of end and round the month up. So you'll see that in a couple days. It'll be in March, but what can you do? Here are some other videos you might be interested in. If you haven't subscribed, you'll definitely want to do that. You can hit my little icon up there and it'll subscribe you and you can watch all the super fun things that are coming up. So I hope you guys have a wonderful, amazing, super crafty weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye!